In this entity model, you will have database, table names, field names, data types, relationships, and everything. And for this entity model, we design the database and tables. That means a developer cannot design anything by himself with his own creativity. A developer always have to build a component according to certain rules and according to certain principles. As a software developer in a real world development process, you can't show your own talent inside this architecting an application. You have to simply follow certain rules according to the client requirements. The rules will be defined by the architects according to the client requirements. You have to follow the rules and you have to define the components. That means technically a contract defines set of rules for designing a component, for designing any component. A contract defines set of rules for designing any component. So technically, contract in computer programming, especially in object-oriented programming, comprises of some set of rules that we need to follow for designing any component. And very important is contracts are designed in object-oriented programming by using interface. Contracts are designed in object-oriented programming by using interface. If in any interview anyone asks you, like, what is the purpose of an interface in object-oriented programming? You talk about so many points about interface, whatever you know. That means that tells your level of experience and your level of expertise in your technology, means in software technology. And you talk about so many things about interface, but you don't use the word contract. That itself tells that you are not great in software architecture. That means just you know about it, but you are not aware of complete architecture of it. According to the software architecting, right? So a software developer knows that he needs to design the components according to certain contracts. And interfaces are used for designing contracts. Interfaces are used for designing contracts. So what is the purpose of an interface? To define contract. And remember, whatever defined in contract is by default mandatory. That means in a contract you mentioned some points. It's mandatory to follow them. However, we can make some options in the contract as optional also. That means, okay, these things you can ignore, but these are mandatory. By default, everything defined in a contract is mandatory to implement. That means every rule defined in a contract is by default mandatory to implement. So however you can define optional rules in a contract. How it is done, I will tell you. That means you cannot design everything simply like that. In order to design, you need to follow certain rules, and technically those are called as contracts. So to design rules for our components, we use contracts, and contracts are designed by using interface. So you know the word generally contract. That means suppose you have a house to be constructed and you given a contract for a builder. What does that mean? That means that the builder have to follow all the rules that he agreed with you in the contract and build that in the same way with the same features. In that, some may be optional, which he can ignore, but some are mandatory. He must do that. That means everything in the contract is according to client requirements for us, and you cannot miss them. It's mandatory. Some are optional that we will see how to make it optional, but by default, everything is mandatory. And contracts are defined in TypeScript, by using interface. In every object-oriented programming, they are defined by using an interface only. So the purpose of interface in object-oriented programming is to design contract. That means the syntax will be like this. Usually the syntax will be like this: interface and interface name, and it contains the members. It contains the members. Now, what are the members? Actually, it is like an object. Already we learned about object type. So interface defines. Actually, in a software terminology, we call them as contracts, right? What actually the contract contains, what actually interface contains. So here we write as contract. Always we talk as contract. We will not generally call as interface, right? So if you are talking about interface and just directly you are pointing to interface, then that tells that no, it's not good. That means you are not good in software development. You cannot use the word interface in a general speaking terminology. So as a developer, you need to always use the word contract only. No interface should come. However, in a general environment, you are continuing with the word interface regularly. That's the reason it's not an issue, but in an architect point of view, it should be the word contract always. And that is the correct concept. And a contract defines members which are by default public in access. What are various access specifiers and modifiers available? I will tell you, we will discuss about them. So by default, every contract member is public in access. Hence you should not define any access modifier for member in contract.